been said, if you want to truly understand something, try and look at it from multiple angles. That's probably why there are 4 Gospels. Hi, my name is Pete, and in 2024 I'm reading the whole Bible in its original languages, Hebrew, Aramaic and Greek. I'm using a reading plan that I wrote myself, which is available in an ebook I've released for free. Today I read Mark chapter 1 verses 21 and 22 and Luke chapter 4 verses 31 and 32. 2 passages that talk about the same pretty straightforward topic, Jesus entering Capernaum and teaching people. But the accounts describe this in 2 very different ways, and these reflect the different emphases and themes of the 2 Gospels. Both Gospels describe the following events. Jesus entered Capernaum, he was teaching on the Sabbath. People were amazed at his teaching because he taught with authority. Let's step through the passages and see how they express these 4 basic ideas differently. First, Jesus entered Capernaum. Mark says, "Ke isporevonte is Capernaum," and they came into Capernaum. Luke says, "Ke katilthon is Capernaum polintis Galileas," and he came down into Capernaum, a city of Galilee. Notice the verb of movement in each Gospel. In Mark, this is isporevonte. It's a compound verb made up of the preposition is, into, and the verb porevonte, they travelled. The picture conveyed by this verb is the destination which is being travelled to. In Luke, the verb is katilthen. It's also a compound verb, but this time made up of the preposition kata, down, and the verb ilthen, he went. The picture conveyed by this verb is where Jesus is coming from as he moves. There are other differences too. The verb in Mark is a historical present. That's a present tense verb used to refer to a past event, a technique that gives a sense of immediacy to what you're reading. In contrast, the verb in Luke is a straightforward aorist, a simple past tense reference. And of course the verb's also different because it is plural in Mark and singular in Luke. In Mark, Jesus just called his first disciples, and so they together enter Capernaum. But Luke won't relate this event until the next chapter, and so he has Jesus here travelling in the singular. A final difference is the verb of movement used by each Gospel writer. If we had time, I might look at all the occurrences of porevo and erchome in Mark and Luke, and ask what, if any, differences in the way these verbs are used. Aside from the verb, a major difference between the Gospels here is that Luke gives an extra detail to clarify where Capernaum is, polintis Galileas, a city of Galilee, whereas Mark doesn't give that clarifying detail. This implies that Luke may have expected his readers to be less familiar with the geographical details of the Holy Land. Both Mark and Luke have mentioned Galilee several times before this. Luke feels the need to help the reader understand where Capernaum is in relation to Galilee, whereas Mark doesn't feel the need to make this explicit to his readers. Second, he was teaching on the Sabbath. Mark, ke iphthis savasin, iselthon istin synagogin evivasken. And immediately on the Sabbath, entering the synagogue, he began to teach. Luke, ke in didaskon avtus en dis zavasin, and he was teaching them on the Sabbath. There's more indication here that Mark gives his reader a sense of urgency with his use of the word evthis, immediately. Mark also structures his idea using 2 verbs, a participle, iselthon, coming into, and an indicative imperfect, evivasken, he was teaching. I think the purpose of this seems to me to be to give the sense of continuous movement to the reader. He entered Capernaum and going into the synagogue was teaching, and that's why I translate the imperfect verb as he began to teach. A legitimate rendering of an imperfect, it captures that sense of this is immediately what he started doing once he got there. In contrast, Luke's description is more matter of fact. In fact, by using a periphrastic participle, that is a participle with the verb to be, Luke prevents the reader getting any sense of "and Jesus began to teach." It's a context-setting idea. Third, people were amazed at his teaching. Mark and Luke together say, "Ke exeplisonto epiti vivachi avtu," and they were amazed at his teaching. Mark and Luke use exactly the same words to express this idea, but the way this clause connects to what follows is different for each writer. Fourth, because he taught with authority. Mark says, "In cha vivaskon avtus os exousian echon, ke uch os I chrammatis," for he was teaching them as one who has authority and not as the scribes. Luke, "Oti en exousia in ologos avtu," since with authority was his word. Now with this final idea, Mark restates that Jesus is teaching, also this time using a periphrastic construction to provide context for his punchline, which is a polemic punchline. He contrasts Jesus as one having authority who is not like the scribes. Mark's grammar here highlights Jesus as a single figure, echon, one having, with the plural I grammatis, the scribes. His use of repetition invites that contrast, os, as, one having authority, ke uch os, and not as, the scribes. And he even uses alliteration to draw the reader's attention in to that difference, exousian, echon. In contrast, Luke's description of Jesus' authority is a lot more clinical. Oti, since, makes it a syntactically subordinate statement to what precedes, and Luke doesn't even mention the scribes at all. There is no contrast with anyone here. Instead, Luke uses a roundabout way of talking about Jesus' teaching by o logos avtu, his word. We can see some of the major thematic differences from just two parallel verses in this gospel. Mark is writing to people that he expects to know the geography of the area of Galilee. Luke is writing as though he doesn't expect his readers to know this. 2. Mark is writing to give his readers a sense of drama and immediacy. Luke is writing more clinically to convey information efficiently. 3. Mark placed the calling of the disciples before this event, and as Jesus travels between places, keeps in our minds the fact that they're with him. Luke describes the calling of the disciples after this event, and is laser focused on Jesus at this point. 4. Mark writes in a way to ramp up a sense of tension and conflict between Jesus and the religious academics, but Luke isn't concerned with that theme at this point, and instead writes in a way to highlight his theme of God's Word. There's just some differences that emerge from reading Mark and Luke carefully alongside one another in the original Greek. This year I'm reading the Synoptic Gospels in parallel and finding so many interesting details emerging from this discipline. So if you want to read the rest of the Bible with me in 2024 in the original languages, the details on my Bible reading plan and EPUB reader, which is a free to download and use, can be found in the description below. And if you like the video, please like the video. And if you want to get video updates of my whole Bible read through in the original languages in 2024, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.